It is my great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Mark.
Oh my God. How's everybody doing? Good. I'm Mark, I'm alcoholic. I've been coming to this meeting for, I don't know, maybe about a year now. And this building, I've got a lot of history in this building. My mother retired out here. And when I was a little kid, I'm talking probably 5 or 6 years old, my mother brought me here to see Santa Claus. And I walked up this ramp, or maybe it was a different ramp at that time, and sat up here on Santa's lap and told him what you wanted and left on this side. I was sharing that with Levon. I said I came here to see Santa Claus, and she said, was that last year? And I got to come here on Saturdays, and they had kids' movies, and then a few years later, my oldest son, when he was in kindergarten, first grade, they had his Christmas performance here. And I got to be in this room with Bob Darrell doing step studies and a guy named Scott Redman. So I've had a lot of experience here. When Greg talks about the VA police and paying attention to them, when I was, I don't know, I was probably 2 weeks sober, maybe 30 days. And I had a friend that lived in the Dom, and the old Dom was right down here. And I would come out, and I would drive past the Dom, and you could drive out over the railroad tracks at that time, and I could look back behind the Dom and see if my friend's motorcycle was there. And if it was, then I'd park and go on in and see him. And, you know, I've never thought speed limit signs were for me. And I came zipping down that road over there, and I drove past the Dom and over the railroad tracks, and his car wasn't there, and I threw mine in reverse, and I started backing up, and bam! And I looked in my rearview mirror, and there's the red lights. And I backed right into the VA cop. My license was suspended, and I had no insurance. But I knew him. I grew up with him, and he let me go. And I, you know, to this day, I have no idea what he told, you know, his superiors about what happened to that car. But anyway, I was born and raised here. I was born in the old hospital on South Marina. Today I live on South Mount Vernon, so in 67 years I've made it about 5 blocks. And you know, I went to a workshop run by a guy named Bob Olson. And Bob Olson talked about us. And I share this opinion. I have never met an alcoholic or a drug addict that does not suffer from low self-esteem. You know, there may be one, but I've never met him. And, you know, and what Bob said was well-meaning people, when we're little bitty kids, give us messages that tell us we're not good enough. And, you know, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I was taught that I was a sinner as a little bitty kid. And as I grew up in that church, it seemed like everything I liked and wanted to do, I was going to go to hell for it. And when I was 7 years old, my oldest brother got killed in a car wreck. And if you guys know anything about the Baptist church, you know, you don't, drinking is, you will go to hell if you're a Baptist and you drink. So I suggest you, if you get sober, get away from the Baptists. But anyway, probably some of them will catch me at the back afterwards. But anyway, my brother had just turned 18 years old, and he'd been drinking, and they got in a car wreck, and my brother was killed. And my brother was my hero. And I can remember, like, I didn't believe it. You know, I didn't accept it. I thought, you know, he'll show up one of these days. And I cannot even, I have 2 boys today. I have no idea what it's like to lose a kid. None. I know some of you do. And I can't blame my mother for this, but my mother, I believe she wanted to protect my other brother and I, and she wasn't willing to let that happen to another kid. And I grew up, you know, my mother, I can still remember my mother talking and referred to me as Little Mark. You know, I wasn't allowed to play football because I might get hurt, you know, with my Little Mark. And I think I carried this stuff with me. And now, I didn't start drinking till I was 21 years old. And what I found was when I started drinking, man, I became good enough. If I went in a bar and I was sober, I can't talk to the girls, I can't shoot pool, I can't dance. Give me a few drinks. I can dance all night, talk to all the girls. I'm a shark on the pool table. And I thought, you know, what the Baptists have been telling me is, you know, just a bunch of lies. This stuff was incredible. Well, I like to drink alcohol and drive fast, and the police didn't like that. Now, when I was doing it, man, they didn't do to you what they do nowadays. I can remember driving up Montezuma in a Pinto. I had a 1972 Pinto. And it was a nice Pinto. This wasn't a regular one. You know, it had the hatchback with the glass. And I was doing 70 miles an hour up Montezuma. And I got pulled over in Shepherd Brothers gas station. And I knew the cop. And he got out and he came up and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Man, I'm just drunker than shit." And he said, "Can you make it home?" And I said, I think so. And he said, "Get there." Another time I pulled into the driveway and I got out of my car and my next door neighbor's a cop. And he's got me blocked in. And he points at me and he tells me, "If that car moves again tonight, you're going to jail." And then I got 3 DUIs that they weren't quite that nice. But still, that was in the 80s when that happened, maybe late 70s, early 80s. Same place where I got pulled over going 70 miles an hour in that Pinto. I don't know how fast I'm going. I was at a bar called Funky's. Anybody in here remember a bar? Nobody in here as long as I've been here. Somebody back there remembers it. I was in a bar drinking beer and smoking opium all day. And and one thing I forgot to tell you here when I started. If I say anything up here tonight that offends any of you folks, keep in mind that Wednesday afternoon I got a call from Mike asking me if I would fill in tonight. So if I say anything that offends any of you guys, just remember I'm the substitute, okay? Anyway, so I'm right on that curve by the Shepherd Brothers station, and there's an RV in front of me, and I start to pass him, and I go around him and I hit some elderly gentleman and his wife and totaled. I was driving my wife's car, totaled her car, not this wife, another one. Anyway, they wrote me four tickets that night. DUI, I blew a 3-2. Driving left of center, failure to control, and speeding. I had what we used to call a lid. Anybody in here know what that is? Of pot in my pocket, and as soon as that wreck happened, I stuffed that down my pants. And they handcuffed me and put me in the back seat of that police car. And gospel truth, handcuffed. I got that out of my pants, put it in my mouth, and I knew that if I swallowed it, I'd choke to death. Spit it back out. Okay, and those back seats are not like they are nowadays, you know, where it's all a molded piece of fiberglass or whatever. It was like a regular back seat in a car, and I stuffed that pot behind their seat. They took me in. They allowed somebody to come and get me. I've never been behind the bars in a jail cell. But anyway, 2 weeks later, I'm driving on Gurley. I get pulled over again. I blow a 2.9 this time. I have another bag of pot and a little vial of hash oil. He doesn't handcuff me, and while we're riding to the sheriff's office, I put both of those behind their seats. I lived up in Walker on 9 acres, and in order to get up to my house, there was a dirt road, and you could hear and you could see anybody, you know, several minutes before they got up there. And this is a couple of days after the second arrest, and here comes a sheriff's car. So I know they found this stuff, you know. And on this 9 acres, there's two cabins. The one I'm in, and there's one behind me. And I am going around in my house getting anything that I have and flushing it down the toilet before these sheriffs get to my house. And they come up and they knock on the door, and I go to the door, and they're looking for my neighbor. Anyway, April 29th of this year, if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I'll celebrate 34 years. And that's it. I'm done. No. So I got lots of stories, okay? I mean, but I don't want to stand up here tonight and stay drunk. So I'm going to just touch on a couple more. You know, the drinking, you know, one thing that happens with me is when I take a drink, I got to have another one. And I stop when I pass out, when I'm arrested, maybe when I run out. I never go, oh, boy, I've had enough. You know, I think I'll stop. My ex-wife used to, you know, have a drink or maybe a drink and a half, and she'd say, oh, I'm starting to feel it, you know. And I'd say, you got to drink through that, you know. And I have spent a lot of time thinking, God, you know, like my brother can have we can have 10 people at Thanksgiving, and he brings a bottle of wine. And I'm looking at that going, you know, I mean, if I start with that, I need to have 2 or 3 of those, not a bottle of wine. And he'll pour a glass of wine and drink half of it and pour the other half down the sink. That's not me, you know. But the truth, I don't want to be that guy. You know, 2 beers, a half a glass of wine, a few puffs off of a joint, a couple of lines, that doesn't get me where I want to go. You know, I mean, I need 15 beers and maybe a Quaalude on top of that. And so, you know, I'm drinking more and more, and things are happening to me. Like when I I mean, I'd start a fight with my wife so I could go to town. I'd go to town, and I'd get drunk, and I'd eat Valium. And I always drove home. 3 different times I made it home, and my vehicle was wrecked. I have no idea what I hit. None. You know, I didn't get caught. But then things like I can't get out of bed to pee. You know, or if I mean, it's gospel truth. If I got up, I couldn't find the door of my bedroom. And, you know, and then I got these DUIs, and I thought, you know, maybe I got a drinking problem. And what happened with the DUIs, I knew the judge. I sold him firewood. I went to see him before my case went to court. And for 2 DUIs, 2 speeding, you know, all those tickets, I think I had 6, 2 of them DUIs, he sentenced me to 30 days in jail and suspended it. He took my license away on Friday and gave it back to me on Monday. And he fined me $500. I mean, that was what happened. And he sent me to the West Yavapai Guidance Clinic for counseling. And I was working in the Verde Valley. I think I went to that counseling once a week. I'd stop at the drive-in liquor store in Camp Verde, get a 6-pack of beer, can of Squirt, pack of Certs, pack of gum, and I'd drink those 6 beers on the way to my counseling. And I sat in the room, and it was a fairly good-sized room, and I was the only client. And I just didn't get where that guy could smell me. And after a period of time, what he told me was to drink 2 or 3 and quit. That was what this counselor told me. And he wrote the court a letter and said I had, you know, successfully completed the program. And I got to the point where honestly, guys, I don't know how I found AA. I do not know. I believe today that a group of alcoholics somewhere held hands and had a moment of silence for the alcoholic who still suffers. And I got to come. I don't know any other way how I found it. But I found AA. I went by, I mean, I don't know if it was intergroup. I don't know what it was. I know where it was. It's where Grove Avenue intersects with Gurley and the building up on top of the hill. I called. They told me to come in. I went in. There were 4 men in there. And when I told them what happens when I drink, they did not say, drink 2 or 3 and quit. What they said was, oh yeah. And they told me their stories. And their stories were worse than my story. That's the first time I ever talked to anybody that understood what was going on when I drink. Then they invited me to go to an AA meeting that night. And here a few weeks ago I told Mike that that first meeting was in this room, but I think I was wrong. I think it was down here at the Old Dom. And I went to that meeting, and I quit drinking. I didn't drink again for about 4 years. I just started using drugs every day. And I love the bars, man. You know, nowadays you guys have Tinder and something about fish and you know, we had the bars, man. We had Whiskey Row, and so you know, even though I'm not drinking, I'm down on Whiskey Row, and I'm down there one night, and a guy turns me on to cocaine. And Time magazine had come out with an article that said that if used properly, cocaine was not as addictive as heroin, should not carry the same penalties. And I thought, man, that's a drug for Mark, you know. And it did the same thing for me again. It made me good enough. It made me be able to talk to the girls. It made me be somebody. It made me fit in. It made me not be little Mark. Now, the consequences of using that were different than the booze. I never peed on the bedroom wall. I wasn't asleep very much. But what happened is I developed a drug-induced psychosis. And so what happened then, and I'm just going to tell a couple of these stories and that's it. I'd see shit, man. I mean, and when I tell this, I still see it. And the hallucinations from cocaine-induced psychosis are different than LSD. You know, LSD, you know that's not, somewhere you know that's not right, you know. But what happened to me with cocaine, I lived in Groom Creek. By this time, my wife had run me off, or I probably ran off with Miss Right Now, and then she got rid of me. But that's supposed to be funny. But anyway, I'm home, and I've been up 3 or 4 days, and I'm looking across the street, and I can see these long-haired kids siphoning gas out of my neighbor's car. And I called the sheriff. And I told the sheriff what's going on. And then I'm watching them, you know. And then they came into my yard. And I had a 6-foot chain link fence all around where I lived. And I still see this when I tell this. They came into my yard. There was one of them straddling the fence, one in my yard and one outside my yard. And I had a turbocharged Audi, and they had it jacked up in the air like a race car. You know how they jack them up sideways? And they were taking my tires and wheels off and my bumper and handing that over the fence. And then I looked, and there's a girl sitting in the driver's seat with a gun pointed at me. I called the sheriff's back. I said, "Where the hell are you?" Now they're in my yard taking parts off of my car. And I said, "They got a gun, and I got one too." I said, "Somebody's going to get killed." They got to my house pretty quick then. And I went outside, and I looked at my car, and there's nothing wrong with my car. And so but I know they were siphoning gas, you know. So we go across the street, and it had rained, and it was a dirt street, and there's no footprints. And I remember the sheriff turning to me and going, "What's your name?" Date of birth. And then he said, "Do you think somebody's after you?" Anyway, that's enough of that stuff. I started, coming back. I went to my second meeting. And I spent a lot of time trying to stay. And I could stay maybe 30 days, maybe 45 days. But my thinking would always tell me that, I got 48 days today, man. And it's Friday night, and everybody's going to be downtown. And if I do just a little bit, I can go down there. And you guys here at AA don't need to know. I'm gonna drink just a little bit tonight, and I'm gonna use just a little bit, and I'll be back tomorrow with 49 days. And I did that for about 2 years. And I was at the Wednesday night Prescott group. And there was a little old lady in there who shared, and there was just something about this woman. And after the meeting, I wanted to talk to her, but everybody congregated around her. And I remember that I just went up and I reached through the crowd and I touched her. Because I didn't think I was good enough to actually have her talk with me. And I left. Probably went back out. And then I ran into her again at a restaurant, at Denny's, I think, after the meetings, how we always used to go get coffee. And at that meeting, I got to talk to her. I'm at that restaurant. And she gave me her phone number, and she told me to call her. And I had $600 in my pocket, and she told me to take that home and give it to my mother. And instead, I spent that last time I went out. And I remember I pulled up in the parking lot of the old Alano Club on Granite. And I sat out in the car and I used some of it. And then I took some inside with me so that just in case I need some more before the meeting's over, I'll have it. And I'm in the bathroom using that before the meeting starts. And then I came out and I sat down and they picked a subject of honesty. And I thought, what the hell am I going to say if they call on me? And so I left. Went to Cartier's bar. And that started 3.5 days of me being out the last time I was out. And I won't even try to tell you about the stuff that chased me whenever I was out the 3.5 days. But I did call Patty, and she invited me over, and I went to see her. And she was 82 years old, and she had 36 years of sobriety. And she told me, "You're welcome at my house anytime." She said, "I ask one thing of you. The next time you feel like going back out, I want you to get a hold of me. And I want you to come and see me, and I want to talk about it. And when we're finished talking, if you still want to go, you can go, and you can still come back, and I'll still be your friend." And I made that agreement with her. And I wanted to tell her, "Lady, you don't know what happened to me the last time. I will never touch that stuff again." All it took was 10 more days, and I'm ready. But I kept my agreement with that lady. And on the way to her house, I thought, we're not going to talk about the weather. We're not going to talk about a damn thing. We're going to talk about the fact that I want to go out, and then I'm gone. I mean, that's the deal. But when I got to her house and I told her what was going on, what I found out was what I call the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's one alcoholic talking to another one. What happened is, as long as I kept that shit inside and didn't talk to a sober member of the program, I go. But as soon as I started telling her my plan, it started to not make sense. And I got to go home that night. I got to keep my money. I got to go to bed. I got to sleep. I got to get up the next day and go to work. And I woke up with a feeling that I had never experienced. And I'd really love to say that's the only time I ever needed to do that, but that'd just be complete bullshit. I had to go back to Patty's house a number of times and tell her, this is what's happening, and I feel like going back out. Today, I know that magic of one alcoholic talking to another one will take care of damn near everything that I have in my life. I'll kind of jump through some stuff here. Can we keep this meeting here till about 8:30 tonight? No. Anyway, I'm 5 years sober. I'm diagnosed with melanoma, and the not good enough syndrome, man, that came in. My girlfriend had died of breast cancer prior to that. I saw that's what's going to happen to me. And the people in this program stood by me. That was 29 years ago now that happened. But I had a young girlfriend, and I could sit here and spin it, but I won't. She dumped me, and and went back to her old boyfriend. And oh my God, and I've been operated on for cancer. Shit, I'm never going to get another girl the rest of my life, and I've got to have her back. And I talked to this guy who had 30 plus years in the program, and I said, I'm praying to God for him to bring the right woman, that's the word I used, the right woman into my life. And I said, and I can help God. I can tell him her address and her phone number. And I'll never forget, that guy looked at me and he said, do you think God's a pimp? And he said, why don't you pray for God to mold you into the man who would attract the right woman? Why don't you try that? And I did. And I didn't meet the right woman right away. But what happened is it changed how I treated women. I started treating women with respect. And Lori and I... and another lady, the other lady was in the program, Lori wasn't, I was. But we were just buddies, and we hung out, and we went to the movies, and we ate dinner, and Lori would tell me about guys she wanted to go out with, and I was sitting in my hot tub in the mornings, and I'd call Lori at 6 o'clock, and I'd say, are you awake? And she'd say, now I am, But we were friends for a year, and then things changed. And I don't know, a month ago, I guess we celebrated 25 years of being married. But a lot of times I don't tell all that part of it. I just tell that Lori and I got together when she had 2.5 months, because she started going to the program. I had 8 years. She had 2.5 months. And I use that as proof that the 13th step does work. But I keep looking at my watch because I want to tell you a couple of things. We have 2 boys that have never seen either one of us take a drink or a drug, ever. The oldest one we went to the hospital about 2:30 in the morning. He was born at 7:30 in the morning. They taught him how to breastfeed. At 4:30 in the afternoon, we were driving home. The younger one, we started to the hospital, and we weren't going to make it. We had to drive to Cottonwood. And, I was driving 100 miles an hour, passing people on the right. He was born on a gurney in the emergency room. Had a hole in his heart, hole in his lung, premature. The cord around his neck, he had aspirated meconium. They put him in ICU. They didn't try and teach him how to breastfeed. And I thought, and the doctors told me it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that's what I was told before my girlfriend died of breast cancer. And I did not want to get close to that little boy. because I don't want to get to know him, man. I don't want to feel this pain. At this time, I'm 17 years sober, and we were involved in a roundup function. And there were 160 alcoholics meeting in the men's gym at the junior high. And I called over there, called the girl that took over, and I told her what was happening. And I didn't know this at the time, but they stopped that meeting, and 160 alcoholics prayed for my little boy. Today he's 6 foot tall. Hell of a kid. I learn a lot from my kids. That little boy started teaching me the day he was born. They flew him to a neonatal center in Flagstaff, and they came in with this huge thing to put this little boy in. And man, I don't want to be anywhere near it. And then I thought, man, you're that little boy's daddy. You've got to go over there. And there was a place where I could put my hand in there. And I put my hand in, and that little boy squeezed my finger. And he let me know that it's going to be okay. I was a general contractor, built custom homes. We lost our business in the crash of 2008, 2009. And what happened, I mean, I was, through lots of other reasons, but I was paying yesterday's bills with today's money. And today's money dried up. And I couldn't finish paying yesterday's bills or today's bills. And there was a guy, I was building a beautiful home for this man, and I couldn't finish it. And I had to go see him, and I had to go tell him, I cannot only not finish your home, I can't even do what you've already paid me to do. And I did not want to do that, man. I didn't want to go see that man, but I did. And I was able to do it because of people in this program. And this was right before Christmas. And after I told this guy, I started to leave, and he gave me and I'm talking about 50 grand that he got hurt for. He gave me $500. And I said, what's this for? And he goes, I want to make sure that you and Lori and the kids have a good Christmas. And then until I could get a job, that guy took me out to lunch 5 times and gave me 5 $100 bills each time, and he paid for lunch. And I started praying, God, mold me into the man that will attract the job you want me to do. And I got a job driving an old van for a treatment center. And they paid me $10 an hour. And I remember I did not want to drive that thing around this town. I didn't want people I knew to see me in it. But I took an attitude that I'll be the best van driver they ever had. Within some time, I moved up in that company, and then but one thing I saw in treatment is they treated the clients like they were second-class citizens. They treated them in a condescending manner. And I thought, I mean, they made them, I don't know if they still do this, they made them wear signs and shit, you know. You'd see these kids in the grocery store with signs on them, boy band or whatever it'd say. I mean, what a novel idea. Take a shitload of 21, 22, 23-year-old young men and women and tell them to stay away from each other. That ain't going to happen. You know, you might as well walk outside and tell the wind to turn around and blow the other direction, you know. But what I realized was, I mean, I didn't get sober like that, man. When I got sober, I was treated with love and care and compassion and respect. And many, many times I went back out. When I came back in the door, all they ever said to me was, "Glad you're here." Nobody ever told me I was a dumbass. Nobody ever put a sign around me that I had to wear. So Lori and I came up with an idea to start a program where kids could finish treatment, because all these kids that go through treatment in 30, 60 days, they get out, they go home, they're loaded that day. So we started a program where they could finish treatment and then they could come and be part of our program. And we kept them for 6 months, a year. We worked steps. We had them get sponsors. We had them go to meetings. We did barbecues. We threw dances. And we treated them like human beings. And they ate it up. And I met a guy that was fully licensed. He had no clients. I had 50 clients. We merged and we started what was Solutions and Bridges Network. And we eventually got to probably work with 2,000 young kids. Guy came and tried to buy our program in 2014, and Lori had a belief that pregnant women needed help. And he told us, first thing is the pregnant women got to go, they're a liability. And I said, that ain't happening, man. And we didn't sell, and we eventually did. But here's what happened. Our focus was help the alcoholic. I never, ever, ever told somebody they couldn't come because they didn't have any money. If you didn't have any insurance, you didn't have any money, you came anyway. And but somewhere along the line, we had people with master's degrees and PhDs and doctors, and I had 100 employees. And I got a real big head around it. And I was putting lots of money in the bank. And we lost our purpose. And it started going downhill. Luckily, we were able to sell it in 2017. But, there was a girl there. Her name was Jordan. And Jordan had hair that went up like this, and Jordan was gay, and Jordan had shit stuck in her face all over, and tattoos, and Jordan came up to me one time and was thanking me for helping her. And I looked at Jordan and I said, "Jordan, I'm thanking you for helping me." And she goes, "Well, what did I do?" I said, "Well, look at you. And I don't judge you. When I first met you, man, I wouldn't have anything to do with you. And you taught me that it's what's inside. It's not what's on the outside." I want to finish with this. I talked about my youngest son and what I learned from him. My oldest son wrote this when he was a junior in high school. Take about 3 minutes. We were up in the mountains of Colorado, and we were photographing this huge bull moose. And I think we pissed him off. And he charged us. Okay. And we ran. Okay. Says, "I ran. There was no looking back. I sprinted noisily through the quiet forest, leaped over fallen trees, and dodged the outstretched arms of thorny branches. This was not my natural territory, and he knew that. I could hear his swift legs moving at twice the rate of mine, could practically feel his hot breath coming down my neck. The majesty and grace that I was so recently photographing had turned into vehemence and determination. I was on his home, and he wanted me out. As I stumbled back to the car, he snorted at me one more time, then turned and ran back into the safety of the forest. I was left panting and shaking with fear. All of this for just the chance to capture the perfect photograph. And to think some people consider moose to be friendly." I understand that coming within 10 yards of a 2,000-pound bull moose in his own territory was not the smartest decision, but the adventure was too great to ignore. As a photographer, it was almost impossible to pass up that kind of opportunity, especially when I am so passionate about taking pictures. My father inspired me with this love of photography, and it was through his help that developed this skill. While I'm standing in my living room, I see my entire life in photographs spread out across the wall, each frame containing a time capsule of life. Next to the moose picture, I notice an old one of my family. It reminds me of some of my first memories of my parents and me gardening in our own forest, while my dad captured pictures of everything. I didn't realize it then, but my parents' choices and actions up to this point would become the biggest influence on my life. My parents met in Alcoholics Anonymous. They had both been influenced by drugs and alcohol at an early age, and each of them came close to death. The program, however, gave them tools for living that don't just keep them clean and sober, but help to change them as people. Although these changes started taking place before I was born, I've been the lucky recipient of their effects. Some of the gifts my parents have passed on include kindness, service, and an optimistic attitude. I love helping others and seeing my efforts affect their life for the better, which is a significant aspect of AA. The optimistic attitude is an even more amazing gift, because both of my parents have been through their lowest points. They have been through their lowest points, and they have a different perspective. The small trials of life are never large burdens, and they are able to focus on the solution instead of the problem. I learned all this from them and can apply it to my life as a student and an active community leader. I use the skills of problem solving and optimism daily, whether it is finding solutions to problems that arise in clubs or staying optimistic through times of adversity, such as my family's bankruptcy, which we had to go through sober. I didn't get to that. Besides simply developing my personality, however, AA has also indirectly influenced my academics and goals. Determination is the word that can describe my goals in school life best. In school, the rigorous coursework can be overwhelming, but I am always able to do well because I have a strong desire to succeed. My parents displayed this attitude of determination and inspired me through their tireless effort and strength during times of hardship. My goals have been shaped by my determination as well. Growing up around AA means frequently attending the meetings, and at those meetings there are people who aren't much older than myself. Seeing the choices they made with their lives and how they were affected gives me inspiration to work hard and stay out of bad situations. I look back to the moose picture, and I am instantly sent back in time. As I stood panting and watching the moose run away, I began to laugh. How many people can say they've been chased by a moose? As I look back on it, I realize that the final and perhaps most important trait I inherited through my parents is the ability to take risks and face fears. I have inherited a charismatic and ambitious attitude, which helps me constantly ask why instead of why not, or the other way around. I have learned that chances like photographing a moose from 10 yards away, delivering public speeches, and expressing opinions are all incredible life experiences. I now realize that my parents' influence has completely defined my life and caused me to develop into the person I am today. And what I want to tell you is I never have had a conversation with my son about AA. I didn't do that. We live it. And Inside our home, when you walk out the front door, there's a sign on the wall, a little plaque, says, "I don't tell God about my big problem. I tell my problem about my big God." Thanks, guys.